I absolutely love spring, and it's March. And by the time March gets here, I don't know if you guys are anything like me, but by the time March gets here, I am completely done and over with winter. Anybody else done with winter by the time March gets here? I am ready for the snow to be gone. I'm ready for the short, darker days to be gone. I love that the sunlight is starting to rise earlier and set later, and the days are getting longer. And this past week and weekend, as a family, we went outside and we just enjoyed the warm weather. There's just something about the sun shining down on our face that we just absolutely love. And as I think about spring and I think about March, I realize that there are two types of people in this world. There are types of people that absolutely love thunderstorms, and there are types of people that hate thunderstorms. How many of you absolutely love thunderstorms? Anybody? A few of you? How many of you hate them? A few of you? Okay. All right. So I fall in the category of that person that absolutely loves thunderstorms. Absolutely loves thunderstorms. I remember that from the time I was even a little kid, I loved thunderstorms. I remember going over to my grandma's house, and in her living room, she had this one window that faced west. And I don't know if her window was tinted or what, but every time I looked out that window as a kid, I was like, a storm is coming. Oh, I'm so excited. And I would go around saying, Mom, Dad, I think there's a storm coming. Look out that window. And sometimes I would be right, and sometimes it was just the tint, and I would be wrong. But I would get really, really excited about thunderstorms because I absolutely love thunderstorms. And so I started thinking, why do I love thunderstorms so much? And I think there are two reasons as I started to think about it. One, I have always been just enamored by their power. I have always been enamored by the power of a thunderstorm, that it can roll in and it can take trees and rip them out of the ground. I've been enamored by the power of a thunder that can shake the entire house. The power behind that sound and those sound waves moving through your house, that it can shake your entire house. Or a torrential rain, that when you go out in the torrential rain and it's blowing so hard and it's falling so fast that it literally hurts your skin because it just is so powerful. I've always been enamored by a storm's power. But I've also always been very interested and captivated by the contrast that happens in the midst of a storm. The contrast of this bright sunny day turning into a sky that is dark. The contrast of lightning breaking out and this light breaking through a blackened sky. And this contrast of light to darkness, and it almost feels like there is a battle going on in the midst of a storm. And this idea of light and darkness is something that is a theme throughout the pages of the Bible. From the beginning all the way to the end, there is this continual recurring theme of light and dark, and light and dark, and oftentimes light represents good and Jesus, and dark represents evil and Satan and places you don't want to go. And you can tell this from the very beginning, how important this is going to be. In Genesis chapter 1, the very first couple verses, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.'" Now, what I love about this is this is not when God created the sun or the moon or the stars. None of that was created at this point. That came a few days later. The most important thing, the very first thing that God created, the very first thing that He spoke into existence was simply light. Because something had to take over this darkness that was over the face of the deep. There had to be a contrast to the darkness. And if you continue throughout the Old Testament, you'll see that when God's people were leaving Egypt, there was a plague of darkness over the Egyptians, but God's people still were able to see. They still had light. And we see that God led his people through a pillar of fire so that they would have light as they traveled throughout the night. And we see that David in 2 Samuel talks about how God brought light into his life and God brings light into darkness. And the Psalms often compares God to light and how this light changes things. Light and dark, light and dark. And there is this huge contrast. And all through the Old Testament, all the books before Jesus, we see this contrast building of light and dark and light and dark. And it sets up the biggest act, the biggest contrast that could have happened of light breaking into the darkness. But before I go to that, I want to tell you about the craziest storm that I ever experienced and the contrast that happened in the midst of it. I was in high school, and I may have been in middle school, and I was working with my dad out in this field that was next to his house. And I don't remember what we were doing, but I remember we were trying to get the job done before a storm that was going to come in later that afternoon. And so we were working feverishly trying to get this job done. And every once in a while we would look up and we could see the storm clouds starting to build out in the distance. And it would remind us, all right, we got to get going. And pretty soon we could hear this rumble of thunder that would happen. And my dad was like, all right, well, we better start cleaning up. We better get inside. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it was like a sunny day. The clouds were building in the distance, but it was still sunny where we were. All of a sudden, and maybe you've experienced this, these giant clouds that just build and build and build. And suddenly you see multiple layers of clouds just hovering and moving and rolling around. And they come in and they block the sun so that it's not like completely black, but there's that eerie storm just shadow that comes over. And I remember we were beating the storm to the house, and about the time we got to the house, this just torrential rain and this wind started to whip through the yard and through our house. And so we ran inside, and I remember my parents have this living room, right? And it kind of goes up like this, and then there's like a peak at the ceiling, and it's all windows. And so I'm the person that absolutely loves thunderstorms, right? So I'm just standing in the living room right? Just, this is awesome. And before I know it, right, the sunlight is completely shifted and weird and strange, and these clouds are blocking the sun, but they're creating this green version of themselves. Totally wicked, weird, crazy, right? And I remember standing there in front of all these windows. My parents' house is kind of in a wooded area, standing in front of all these windows, and I'm just watching as the trees are going, oh, oh, oh. And I'm like, this is awesome, right? And my parents, we're never the type of people that were like, let's get to the basement because the storm is coming. But during this storm, the sirens went off, the trees were going absolutely nuts, and my parents were like, everybody get to the basement right now, right? And you know what I did? I just stood there. I could not take my eyes off the storm because it was so incredible. And the clouds were changing the light to dark, and there was this wind and this rain, and it was all coming together, and it was all just absolutely crazy. And I remember my parents first tried to yell at me a couple times to come down in the basement, and I refused. I just stood there watching this storm tear through my parents' yard. And I stood there and I watched, and eventually my parents came up and they dragged me down the stairs, and I'm holding on, trying to watch as long as possible before they dragged me down into the basement. And when the dust settled and the storm was over, we looked out and the light had come back. And I looked out into my parents' yard where I was looking before, and there were like 10 trees that had just been completely uprooted. There were these it wasn't a tornado, but there were straight line winds that were like over 100 miles an hour that just completely demolished this row of trees as it went down through my parents' yard. Absolutely crazy. It's crazy the contrast that happens when a sunny day can turn into blackness, can turn into destruction. It's crazy. And oftentimes, I said this earlier, but oftentimes I realize there is a scientific reason for why thunderstorms happen. I realize that, it's the hot and the cold air molecules mixing and, electrons and protons and the negative and the positive energy flowing back and forth and all of that stuff. But here's what I think in my own mind is it kind of feels like darkness and light are battling for the day. It feels like darkness is trying to come in and take over the day, and the light is trying to shine through and outshine the clouds and keep the darkness out. And there is this giant battle that brews between darkness and light. And in the midst of that giant battle, there is damage that happens, and there's lightning, and there's thunder, and there's wind, and there's rain, and trees are uprooted, and sometimes houses are even demolished. And it's this craziness that happens when darkness and light collide. Here's the truth. There's a battle going on for your soul right now. Darkness and light. They're colliding. They're fighting for you. They're fighting for your future. They're fighting for your day right now. And God knew that as a human race, each of us would be facing this battle of darkness and light that was tugging at us and pulling at us and sometimes even tearing us apart. And so in the midst of the Old Testament, there's this major theme that runs through of darkness and light and darkness and light. And it sets up this moment where Jesus enters the world. And in the book of John, the birth of Jesus, Jesus coming into the world, is described in a way that no other writer describes the birth of Jesus. It says this: in the beginning was the Word. The Word is Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, and He, the Word, was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. It's a weird way to say that. In Him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. A lot is happening in this set of verses. In the beginning, Jesus was there. In the beginning was the Word. He was God. Jesus was a part of God, but He was also with God. And it sets up this idea of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. There's this Trinity going on. 3 parts, one God. He says the Word was with God and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Through Him, everything was made. In Him is life. And what is life? It's light. Guys, in our minds, each of us have this version of this life that we seek. And oftentimes, it is a little bit skewed by darkness. And we think that if we achieve certain things, we're going to have a life that is complete and whole and everything that we ever wanted. We believe things about ourselves, like if we're popular enough, if we make enough money, if we do enough things, if we're successful enough in our school or in our career, if we're successful enough in sports, then we will have this life. But the truth is that Jesus is the life. That His light in our lives is life. And there's a battle. There is a battle that is going on for your soul and for my soul. Light and darkness are colliding. And they are fighting for you. But I want you to know, you have someone that has your back. When the darkness starts to creep in, when Satan attacks, when things start to collide and the storms start to come on your life, you have someone that has your back. You have someone that is battling for you, and that person is Jesus Christ. He battled for you when he left heaven and came to earth. He battled for you when he died on a cross. He battled for you when he rose from the grave. And he is battling for you right now, today, as your life is being pulled in two different directions. You have someone that is battling for you. We're going to talk a lot this month about light and darkness and how the light of Jesus changes our own lives and how the light of Jesus can change other people's lives. But tonight I simply want to focus on this. There's a battle going on. There is a battle going on for your soul. Some of you have felt this. You've felt the storms that have come into your life because of this battle and this colliding of light and darkness. You've felt the damage that can happen in the midst of those storms. You've felt the hurt and the pain that goes along with that damage. I don't know if you are in the middle of a storm right now, but I want you to know that if you are in the middle of a storm and you just feel the light and the darkness tugging you and pulling you and honestly just tearing you apart, you have someone that is battling for you. Someone that is more powerful than you or me or anyone else on this earth. Jesus is battling for your soul. I don't know if some of you have experienced storms in the past, and maybe you have some damage that still hasn't been cleaned up. And you have felt those storms, and you've kind of done the equivalent of taking the trees and just kind of pushing them off to the side, but never really cleaning them up. And you've got some damage from some previous storms. I want you to know that Jesus is still fighting for you. And he wants to help you clean up the damage. You have someone that is battling the darkness for you. Now, here's the cool part. One of my favorite parts about a storm is stepping out my front door right when it ends. And the light has broken through. And there is this smell of freshness, of life. Like all of creation is saying, we did it. We did it. We held out. We beat the storm. Someone must have been helping us. Someone must have been battling for us. We did it. We held out. The storm is over. And you can walk out into your yard and you can just see it and smell it and feel it. There is life there. I love the way this section of scripture ends in the book of John. It says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness has not overcome the light. Here's what I want to tell you. If you are in the middle of a storm or you have some damage from previous storms, please don't give up. I know there is a battle going on for your soul, and sometimes it feels like you are being torn apart. But every storm ends. And if that's not you and you're not feeling that now, you are going to go through a storm at some point. And I want you to remember this, that every storm ends. The light shines in the darkness. The darkness has not overcome it. You have someone that is battling for you. And if you can just hold on, if you can just take the next step, if you can just continue on, that storm will end. Every storm does, promise. Please don't give up. Tonight, I simply want to remind you that there's a battle going on. And yes, storms are going to come. Pain is going to occur. But you will always have someone that is fighting for you. Someone that overcame the darkness, that will overcome the darkness. And he's not fighting for you for a future in heaven only. That's part of it. But he's fighting for you for life right here, right now on this earth. He wants you to have the most incredible, amazing life, the most fulfilled life that you could ever experience. And so he left heaven to come to this earth so that you could experience life right now. Every week I leave you with a practical challenge. And this week my practical challenge is actually two things. First, this week at some point, simply do a quick Google search and search for Bible verses about light and see what comes up. And I think you will be blown away about how God describes himself. And you'll be blown away by this battle that is raging and God's willingness to come in on your behalf. Later this week, it's supposed to rain. I don't know if it's going to storm or not. I kind of hope it does. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But if it does, I want to encourage you to simply pause for a moment and look out the window at the storm and remind yourself that when the storms of life come, when the battle is raging for your soul, you have someone that is fighting for you. Check out this video.